Elijah Brooks, a dedicated city councilman from Chicago's South Side, had always fought for his community with unyielding passion. On what was supposed to be a routine flight to a national housing summit, Elijah found himself thrust into a chilling conspiracy. A simple request to show his boarding pass spiraled into an emergency landing, suspicious interrogations, and a relentless smear campaign aimed at silencing his voice. But why was Elijah targeted? And who was orchestrating the shadowy operation against him? As the story unfolds, Elijah uncovers a web of corruption stretching far beyond the airline, a network of powerful individuals determined to crush anyone who stands in their way. With his career and reputation on the line, Elijah must navigate threats, uncover the truth, and rally a community to fight back against a system designed to oppress. What started as an unsettling flight soon became a battle for justice. Who will prevail when the stakes are this high? Why would a flight attendant keep eyeing his seat, clutching a passenger manifest like it held a dark secret? Elijah Brooks, a dedicated city councilman from Chicago's South Side, adjusted his tie and settled into his window seat on the red-eye flight to Miami. This trip was a rare opportunity for him to speak at a national housing reform summit, a cause he'd dedicated his life to. The sleek aircraft hummed with the quiet murmur of passengers settling in, but Elijah couldn't shake the prickling sensation that someone was watching him. The flight attendant, a woman with icy blonde hair and a stiff demeanor named Claire, passed by his seat twice, her gaze lingering a fraction too long. At first, Elijah dismissed it. Years in public service had taught him to ignore subtle judgments. Still, there was something different about Claire's stare, cold, calculated, almost predatory. Across the aisle, a woman with glasses and a sharp, focused expression was typing on her laptop. Her name tag read Sarah, marking her as an attorney from a prominent firm in Chicago. She caught Claire's gaze, then shifted her attention back to Elijah, her brows furrowing as if puzzling something out. "Excuse me," Claire interrupted, her voice clipped. "Can I see your boarding pass again, Mr. Brooks?" Elijah blinked, confused but compliant. "You already scanned it when I boarded. Is there a problem?" Claire's lips pressed into a thin line as she glanced at the manifest in her hands. "Just a routine check." She scanned the pass once more and walked away without further explanation. Sarah leaned over. "They've asked for your boarding pass twice? That's strange." Elijah nodded, trying to brush it off. "Maybe they're just being thorough." As the plane taxied, Elijah caught a glimpse of something unusual on his boarding pass, a faint red mark in the corner. It hadn't been there before. His stomach tightened. The flight took off smoothly, but the air felt heavy. Claire's behavior grew stranger with every passing minute. She avoided eye contact with Elijah, but whispered to her colleagues near the galley. Elijah caught snippets of phrases like, "double-check everything and keep an eye on him." Sarah, whose seat was across from Elijah, leaned closer. "I overheard Claire talking about you in the galley. Something doesn't feel right. Be careful." The unease in her voice matched the feeling building in Elijah's chest. Why would a simple routine check turn into targeted suspicion? The final blow came an hour into the flight. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are making an emergency landing due to technical difficulties. Please remain seated and follow the crew's instructions." Elijah's heart sank. This was no coincidence. The glance Claire threw him as she passed down the aisle confirmed his worst fears. This wasn't about safety, it was about him. As the plane descended, Elijah clenched the armrest, his mind racing. What were they planning? And why was he the target? When the wheels touched down on an isolated runway, surrounded by darkness, Elijah knew one thing for certain: this was just the beginning of a much larger battle. The cabin lights dimmed as the plane rolled to a stop on the desolate runway. Elijah peered through the window, his heart sinking further. There were no terminal lights, no bustling airport staff, just an eerie emptiness bathed in the faint glow of the aircraft's headlights. Passengers murmured in confusion, their whispers a soft buzz of uncertainty. Claire, now wearing a strained smile, addressed them with practiced calm. Ladies and gentlemen, we've arrived safely. Please remain seated while we assess the situation. Elijah leaned into the aisle to catch Sarah's attention. Her expression mirrored his unease. Before he could say a word, Claire and another flight attendant, a young man with a nervous twitch, approached his seat. "Mr. Brooks," Claire said, her tone tight, "we need you to gather your belongings. You'll be disembarking first." Elijah straightened in his seat, his voice steady but sharp. "Why? What's this about?" "It's for safety reasons," Claire replied, her words clipped. "We need to verify some details before continuing the flight." Sarah abruptly stood. "You've got to be kidding me," she said, her voice loud enough to draw attention. "This man has done nothing wrong. Why is he being singled out?" Claire's eyes flicked to Sarah, her facade of professionalism faltering for a split second. "Ma'am, this doesn't concern you. Please sit down." Sarah didn't budge. "If you're removing him, I want to know why. Is this standard procedure? Because it doesn't look like it." Other passengers began murmuring, their heads swiveling toward the commotion. Elijah felt their eyes on him, some curious, others uneasy. "I'll go," Elijah said, breaking the tension. His tone was calm, but inside, frustration and suspicion churned. He grabbed his briefcase and coat, glancing at Sarah. "Thank you, but it's better if I handle this." Claire gestured toward the door, and Elijah walked down the aisle, feeling every pair of eyes tracking him. As he stepped off the plane, the cold night air hit him like a slap. The silence was deafening. A small, unmarked van waited near the runway. 2 uniformed men stood by its doors, their faces unreadable. Elijah hesitated, his instincts screaming that something was wrong. Claire appeared behind him. "This way, please," she said curtly. Elijah turned to her. "Where exactly are we? And what happens next?" Claire didn't answer, her gaze fixed on the ground. "Mr. Brooks," a voice called from behind. Elijah turned to see Sarah, standing at the plane's doorway. She had her laptop clutched to her chest, her expression resolute. "You're not doing this alone." Claire stepped forward, blocking her path. "Ma'am, return to your seat. This isn't your concern." "It is now," Sarah shot back. "I'm his attorney." Elijah's eyes widened slightly at her bold claim. Sarah gave him a subtle nod, silently conveying that she was improvising for his sake. The men by the van exchanged a glance, their postures stiffening. One of them stepped forward, his tone firm. "We're just here to escort Mr. Brooks to a secure area for questioning. There's no need for anyone else to come along." Sarah didn't waver. "Then I'll question the legality of this when we land at a real airport. Or better yet, I'll do it now after all. I'm recording this entire interaction." She held up her phone, its screen glowing faintly. The man hesitated, then stepped back. "Suit yourself." Elijah exhaled, relief tempered by the mounting tension. Together, he and Sarah followed the men toward the van. As the vehicle rumbled to life, Elijah's mind raced with questions. Who had orchestrated this? And what were they trying to hide? One thing was clear. He wasn't just fighting for his dignity, he was uncovering something far more dangerous. Elijah sat rigid in the back of the van, the hum of the engine and the uneven road adding to his growing unease. Sarah sat beside him, her laptop open and fingers flying across the keyboard as she typed furiously. Across from them, the 2 uniformed men avoided eye contact, their expressions unreadable. "Any luck?" Elijah whispered. Sarah frowned, her voice low. "Spotty signal, but I've managed to send a message to my office. If we vanish, they'll know where to start looking." Her blunt words sent a chill through Elijah. He glanced out the small window, but the view offered little comfort, only a vast stretch of empty fields under the shroud of night. "You two need to calm down," one of the men said, his tone lacking conviction. "This is just a routine matter." "Routine?" Sarah snapped, closing her laptop. You diverted a commercial flight, escorted a city councilman off the plane without explanation, and now we're headed where exactly? The man shifted uncomfortably. You'll see soon enough. Elijah folded his arms, leaning forward. No. I want answers. Who gave you the authority to do this? And why am I the target? The second man, younger and clearly less seasoned, broke his silence. Look, we're just following orders, all right? Don't make this harder than it has to be. Elijah's patience snapped. Harder for who? You're detaining an elected official without cause. Do you have any idea what kind of lawsuit this will bring? The older man glared at the younger one, silencing him. But the tension was palpable, and Elijah knew they were hiding something. The van suddenly slowed, its headlights illuminating a decrepit building that seemed to rise out of nowhere. Its crumbling facade and broken windows gave the impression of abandonment, but faint lights glowed from within. This doesn't look like a secure area, Sarah muttered. The van rolled to a stop, and the men gestured for them to exit. Elijah stepped out first, the cold air biting his skin. He scanned the area, noting the lack of any recognizable signage or personnel. A third figure emerged from the building, a tall man in a tailored suit, his polished appearance out of place against the dilapidated backdrop. Mr. Brooks, the man greeted, his voice smooth but devoid of warmth. My name is Leonard Voss. I represent certain interests concerned about your recent political efforts. Interests? Elijah repeated, his voice steady despite the growing dread. Voss smiled thinly. Let's not waste time. Your housing reform initiatives have ruffled some feathers. This is simply a conversation to remind you that not everyone shares your enthusiasm for change. Sarah stepped forward. This is illegal. You have no right. Voss cut her off with a raised hand. Spare me the outrage. No harm will come to either of you provided you listen carefully. Elijah's jaw tightened, but he held his ground. If you think threats will stop me, you don't know who you're dealing with. Voss chuckled. Perhaps. But it's not just about you, Mr. Brooks. It's about the people you represent. Do you really want to put them in harm's way for the sake of your principles? The veiled threat sent a jolt through Elijah. He glanced at Sarah, who gave him a barely perceptible nod. They were outnumbered and isolated, but one thing was clear: this was no time to back down. Let's get this conversation over with, Elijah said, his voice firm. But know this, I won't be silenced. As Voss gestured for them to follow him inside, Elijah braced himself. Whatever awaited them in that building, he was determined to face it head-on and to expose the forces working in the shadows. The air inside the building was thick with mildew and tension. The hallway's flickering lights cast long shadows on the peeling walls, adding to the oppressive atmosphere. Elijah followed Leonard Voss, Sarah close behind him, her laptop now tucked tightly under her arm. Why here? Elijah asked, his voice calm but edged with steel. If this is a conversation, you've chosen a strange venue. Voss didn't turn around. Discretion, Mr. Brooks. A luxury we both value, I'm sure. They entered a dimly lit room that looked like it had once been a storage area. A small table and 2 chairs sat in the center, flanked by standing lamps that cast harsh light on the otherwise darkened space. On the table rested a manila folder. Its contents fanned out a stark contrast to the room's barren surroundings. Please, have a seat, Voss said, gesturing to the chairs. Elijah didn't move. I'll stand, thanks. Voss smirked, but his eyes were cold. Suit yourself. He picked up the folder, flipping through its contents. You've been busy, proposing sweeping housing reforms, calling out corrupt landlords, and most recently, blocking a lucrative development project in South Shore. Impressive work for a city councilman. It's called doing my job, Elijah replied. Protecting my community from predatory practices isn't a crime. Voss's smile tightened. No, but disrupting powerful interests often comes with consequences. You've stepped on the wrong toes, Mr. Brooks. Before Elijah could respond, Sarah interjected. Let's cut to the chase. This is about intimidation, isn't it? You want him to back off his initiatives, or you'll escalate your threats. Classic power play. Voss chuckled, his gaze shifting to Sarah. And who might you be? His lawyer? A concerned citizen? Or just someone who doesn't know when to walk away? Sarah stared him down. You can try to intimidate me, but it won't work. Elijah isn't alone in this fight. Perhaps, Voss said, setting the folder back on the table. But fights like these have a way of becoming costly. Elijah stepped forward, his voice firm. What exactly are you threatening? Voss folded his hands in front of him. We're simply suggesting you reconsider your priorities. The development project you blocked would have brought significant economic benefits, not just to the city, but to certain stakeholders. Elijah's blood boiled. At the expense of displacing hundreds of families. That's not development. That's exploitation. Voss's gaze hardened. Idealism won't protect your constituents when funding dries up. Think carefully, Mr. Brooks. Before Elijah could reply, Sarah's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her expression shifting to one of subtle alarm. She tapped Elijah's arm, muttering under her breath. We need to get out of here. Now. Elijah turned to her, confusion etched across his face, but Sarah's determined look left no room for argument. Are we done here? Elijah said, turning back to Voss. Voss shrugged, his smugness returning. For now. But remember, this isn't personal. It's business. Elijah and Sarah turned to leave, the tension between them electric. As they exited the building and walked back toward the van, Sarah whispered, I got a signal for a moment long enough to check a name. Leonard Voss isn't just a corporate fixer. He's connected to a lobbying firm that's funded by your political rivals. Elijah's jaw tightened. This isn't just about the housing reforms. It's a coordinated attack. Sarah nodded. And if we don't expose this soon, they'll escalate. The two climbed back into the van, the weight of what they'd learned pressing heavily on them. The fight wasn't just about Elijah anymore, it was about protecting an entire community from forces far more powerful and insidious than they'd imagined. As the van sped away into the night, Elijah stared out the window, his resolve hardening. They wanted him to back down. Instead, he was preparing to fight harder than ever. The van rattled down the darkened highway, the city lights of Chicago a distant glow on the horizon. Elijah sat in silence, his mind racing with everything Voss had said. Across from him, Sarah was furiously typing on her laptop, her face illuminated by the faint glow of the screen. You were right, Sarah finally said, breaking the silence. Leonard Voss isn't just connected to your rivals. He's the point man for a nationwide lobbying effort to dismantle affordable housing initiatives. They've been targeting key figures like you for years. Elijah leaned forward. And I'm guessing that targeting doesn't just mean backroom meetings. Sarah nodded grimly. No. Voss specializes in pressure tactics, blackmail, sabotage, disinformation campaigns. What happened on that plane was just step one. They're trying to discredit you before you can gain more traction. Elijah rubbed his temples, frustration mounting. The housing reform isn't just my fight. It's about stopping developers from pushing out families who've lived in these neighborhoods for generations. If they silence me, they'll steamroll the community. Sarah looked up from her laptop. Then we hit back. I pulled some records from a flight attendants forum one of Claire's colleagues posted anonymously about unusual instructions. For tonight's flight. Elijah's eyes narrowed. Instructions? They were told to flag you as a potential security risk. That's why Claire kept asking for your boarding pass, and why the plane made that mysterious emergency landing. Someone set this up. Elijah let out a slow breath. We need proof. Something tangible that ties this to Voss and his people. Sarah's lips curved into a small, determined smile. I might have just that. She flipped her laptop around to show Elijah a close-up image of his boarding pass. "What am I looking at?" Elijah asked. "Your boarding pass," Sarah explained, zooming in on a faint red mark in the corner. "It's a tag, likely added when you checked in. I've seen this before. It's a subtle way airline identify passengers for special attention, usually for security reasons. But in this case, it looks like someone abused the system." Elijah's stomach churned. "You think Voss arranged this?" Sarah nodded. "It's too convenient to be random. If we can prove this tag was added deliberately, we'll have a direct link between the airline and Voss's operation." Elijah's mind raced. "How do we prove it?" Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard. "I'm pulling the metadata from your boarding pass. It should show when the tag was added and by whom." Minutes passed in tense silence as Sarah worked. Elijah could feel the van turning, its tires crunching over gravel as they neared the edge of the city. "Got it," Sarah said finally. She turned the laptop to face Elijah. "The tag was added manually 6 hours before your flight. And look," she pointed to a name in the log. "Claire," Elijah said, recognizing the name of the flight attendant. Sarah nodded. "But here's the twist: it wasn't Claire who authorized it. Someone higher up in the airline's chain of command approved the request. Guess whose name is attached?" Elijah's eyes darkened. "Leonard Voss." Sarah nodded. "He's not just pulling strings from the shadows. He's actively involved in this. Now we have proof." The van pulled to a stop in front of a nondescript diner on the city's outskirts. The driver turned to them, his expression blank. "This is where I leave you." Elijah and Sarah climbed out, standing under the harsh glow of the diner's neon sign. "What's next?" Elijah asked, his resolve steeling. Sarah closed her laptop and slung her bag over her shoulder. "We take this public. Voss wanted to play dirty. Let's show the world what he's hiding." Elijah nodded, his eyes fixed on the distant skyline of Chicago. The battle had just escalated, but he wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed softly as Elijah and Sarah slipped into a corner booth. The waitress, an older woman with kind eyes, poured them coffee without a word. Elijah took a sip, his gaze distant, but Sarah was already back at work on her laptop. "We're not waiting for them to strike again," Sarah said, her voice firm. "We're going on offense. Voss wanted to keep this quiet, but we're about to blow it wide open." Elijah glanced around the nearly empty diner. "And you think the public will believe us? They're going to spin this, make it look like I'm overreacting or trying to dodge accountability." Sarah smirked. "Not if we show them the receipts." She tapped her screen. "I've drafted a statement and compiled the evidence: the boarding pass metadata, the flight records, and Claire's connection to Voss. But we need more than proof. We need reach." Elijah leaned forward, his voice low. "What's the plan?" "First, we leak the boarding pass details to a trusted journalist," Sarah said, typing furiously. "Someone who can confirm the data and publish it fast. Then we post the rest online. We'll make it impossible for them to control the narrative." Elijah hesitated. "Once we go public, there's no going back. They'll retaliate." Sarah looked up, her expression steely. "They already are. This is how we fight back." Elijah nodded, his resolve solidifying. "Do it." Sarah made a call, her voice professional and concise as she spoke to a reporter she trusted from the Chicago Gazette. "Yes, it's a big story." "No, it can't wait until morning," she said, glancing at Elijah. "I'm sending you the files now. Verify them and call me back." She hung up and exhaled. That's step 1. Step 2 is the social media blitz. Within minutes, Sarah had crafted a series of posts exposing the coordinated effort against Elijah. The tweets were concise but damning. City Councilman Elijah Brooks targeted on a flight. Proof shows direct interference by corporate lobbyist Leonard Voss. Justice for Elijah. This isn't just about one man, it's about silencing housing reform and the voices of marginalized communities. Full story coming soon. Elijah stared at the screen, the weight of the moment settling over him. This could work, or it could make me a bigger target. That's why we're careful, Sarah said, her tone reassuring. We control the narrative. We expose the truth. Her phone buzzed. It was the reporter from the Gazette. We've confirmed the data, he said. It's airtight. I'll have the article live within the hour. Sarah hung up, her smile faint but triumphant. It's happening. Elijah leaned back, exhaling deeply. Good. Now we wait. But waiting didn't mean resting. They knew retaliation was coming. The first wave hit within minutes. A string of anonymous social media accounts began posting accusations against Elijah. Fabricated stories of misconduct, wild claims about his finances, and doctored photos. Sarah grimaced. Classic disinformation play. They're trying to muddy the waters. Elijah's phone buzzed. It was Kevin, his communications director. Boss, it's chaos, Kevin said. The smear campaign is everywhere, but so is the Gazette article. People are rallying behind you. Elijah closed his eyes, letting Kevin's words sink in. Then we keep pushing. Make sure our story stays front and center. Sarah nodded, already drafting a follow-up post. They're fighting dirty, but we've got the truth. And the truth always wins. As the diner's clock ticked past midnight, Elijah and Sarah kept working, their determination unwavering. Outside, the city lights glimmered, a reminder of the fight they were waging, not just for Elijah, but for the community that depended on him. The storm had begun, but Elijah wasn't afraid. He was ready to see it through. The diner had grown quieter as the night deepened, but inside the booth where Elijah and Sarah worked, the tension was electric. Elijah's phone vibrated against the table. It was Kevin again, his voice low and urgent. Elijah, we just got a tip, Kevin said. Someone from the airline wants to talk. They claim to have information about Claire and the tagging system used on your boarding pass. Elijah straightened in his seat, his pulse quickening. Who? Are they credible? They wouldn't give their name over the phone, Kevin replied. But they insisted it was important and asked to meet tonight. Sarah leaned in, catching the gist of the conversation. It could be a trap, she warned. Or it could be exactly what we need, Elijah countered. Turning back to the phone, he asked, Where do they want to meet? A parking garage downtown, Kevin said. 3rd level. Midnight. Elijah glanced at his watch. It was nearly time. Text me the address. I'll handle it. You sure about this? Kevin asked. No, Elijah admitted. But we don't have much choice. The drive into downtown Chicago felt longer than it was. The city's glittering skyline loomed above, a stark contrast to the shadows pooling in the nearly deserted parking garage. Elijah and Sarah parked on the 3rd level, their car the only one visible. This screams bad idea, Sarah muttered, clutching her laptop bag tightly. Stay close, Elijah said, stepping out. A faint shuffle echoed through the garage. A figure emerged from the shadows, a petite woman in a dark coat, her face partially obscured by a scarf. She hesitated before approaching. Are you Elijah Brooks? She asked, her voice trembling. I am, Elijah said cautiously. And you are? The woman glanced around nervously. Call me Lisa. I work for the airline. Or at least I did until a few hours ago. They fired me after I asked too many questions about what happened on your flight. Sarah folded her arms. Why come to us? Lisa took a shaky breath. Because I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I saw what they did to your boarding pass. That tag was added under direct orders from an executive named Leonard Voss. He's been working with our higher-ups to flag certain passengers, mostly black politicians and activists. Elijah's jaw tightened. How long has this been happening? Lisa hesitated, her eyes darting to the shadows. Months. Maybe longer. They call it a compliance initiative, but it's a cover for targeting people like you who threaten their business interests. Sarah leaned in. Do you have proof? Lisa pulled out a USB drive from her pocket and handed it to Sarah. It's all there. Emails, internal memos, and a log of flagged passengers. They didn't even bother hiding it well. Elijah took a step closer. Why are you risking this? They'll come after you next. Tears welled in Lisa's eyes. Because this isn't right. People like you shouldn't have to fight just to do your job. I couldn't be part of it anymore. Sarah slipped the USB drive into her laptop bag. We'll protect you. But you need to stay safe. Do you have somewhere to go? Lisa nodded. I'll lay low. Just promise me you'll make this public. You have my word, Elijah said firmly. Lisa gave them a small, hopeful nod before disappearing back into the shadows. Back in the car, Sarah plugged the USB drive into her laptop. The files loaded quickly, and as she scrolled through, her expression hardened. She wasn't lying, Sarah said. This is massive. There are lists of flagged passengers, instructions for flight crews, and even notes about coordinating with private security firms. It's all tied back to Wacth. Elijah stared at the screen, a mix of anger and resolve burning in his chest. This isn't just targeting me. It's systemic. They're trying to silence anyone who challenges them. Sarah nodded. And now we have the proof to stop them. As the car sped back toward the city, Elijah felt a renewed sense of purpose. Wacth had played his hand, but now the tide was turning. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time it felt winnable. The city lights blurred outside the car window as Elijah and Sarah raced back to their temporary office at a friend's downtown law firm. The USB drive Lisa had provided felt like a ticking time bomb in Sarah's bag. Inside the small office, Sarah plugged the drive into her laptop and opened the files again. We need to sort this fast, she said. The longer we sit on this, the more time they have to cover their tracks. Elijah paced the room, his thoughts churning. What's our first move? The media? Sarah shook her head. Not yet. This kind of evidence needs to be bulletproof before we go public. If we release it now and there's even a shred of doubt, they'll spin it against you. She scrolled through emails, her brow furrowing. Look at this, she said, pointing to her screen. Elijah leaned over her shoulder. The email was from Leonard Wacth, sent to senior airline executives. Initiate flag protocol for Brooks on Flight 729. Ensure compliance at all costs. Further instructions to follow. Compliance at all costs, Elijah repeated, his voice tight with anger. That's their justification for targeting me? Because I stood up to developers. Sarah opened another file, this one a log of passengers flagged under the same protocol. The list was long, with names Elijah recognized: community leaders, housing activists, and politicians, most of them people of color. This isn't just you, Sarah said grimly. It's a coordinated campaign. They're trying to silence anyone who threatens their profit margins. Elijah clenched his fists. They think they can scare us into backing down. But we're not just exposing this, we're taking it apart. By dawn, they had drafted a plan. Elijah called Kevin, his communications director, to strategize their next move. Here's the play, Elijah said. We're releasing the passenger list, the emails, and the logs to trusted media outlets. But I also want a press conference scheduled. Today. Kevin's voice on the other end was cautious, but resolute. Are you sure? Once we go live with this, they'll come after you harder. Elijah's reply was unwavering. They've already done their worst. Now it's our turn. Hours later, Elijah stood in front of a wall of cameras at a packed press conference. Reporters buzzed with anticipation, their microphones clustered around the podium. Sarah stood off to the side, her laptop in hand, ready to send the files to journalists as soon as Elijah spoke. Good morning, Elijah began, his voice steady but powerful. I stand here today not just for myself, but for every person who has been targeted, silenced, or pushed aside because they dared to speak up. He paused, letting his words settle. What I am about to reveal is not just an attack on me, it's an attack on democracy itself. corporations, and lobbyists have weaponized systems meant to protect us, turning them into tools of intimidation. Elijah motioned to Sarah, who nodded and hit send. Seconds later, reporters' phones began buzzing as the files hit their inboxes. What you're receiving now, Elijah continued, is proof of a coordinated effort by Leonard Voss and his associates to target activists, politicians, and community leaders. This isn't just about me. This is about all of us. The room erupted in questions, but Elijah held his ground, his voice cutting through the chaos. These actions will not go unanswered. I've already contacted legal authorities to investigate this matter, and I will ensure justice is served. The fallout was immediate. News outlets ran headlines like, City Councilman exposes airline conspiracy targeting activists, emails, link lobbyist. Leonard Voss to targeting of black leaders, social media exploded with support for Elijah, while exposed the system trended nationwide. But the response from Voss's camp was swift and ruthless. Within hours, smear campaigns began flooding the airwaves, accusing Elijah of corruption and fabricating evidence. Anonymous threats poured into his office, and his staff scrambled to keep up with the chaos. Sarah closed her laptop and looked at Elijah. They're panicking. That means we're winning. Elijah nodded, but his face was grim. Winning isn't enough. We need to finish this, expose every last piece of their operation before they can regroup. The battle had escalated, but Elijah wasn't backing down. Not now. Not when the truth was finally breaking through the darkness. The atmosphere in Elijah's temporary office was electric. Phones rang nonstop, emails flooded in, and Elijah's team worked tirelessly to control the narrative. The evidence against Voss and the airline had ignited a firestorm, but Elijah knew it wasn't over. The smear campaign against him was gaining traction, and his credibility hung in the balance. Sarah paced the room, her phone pressed to her ear. Yes, we'll share the original documents for verification, she said to yet another journalist. But we need you to emphasize the systemic nature of this. It's bigger than Elijah. As she hung up, Elijah leaned against the desk, exhaustion etched on his face. What's the response so far? Sarah sank into a chair. Mixed. The support is overwhelming, but the opposition is louder than we expected. Voss is funneling everything he has into painting you as a liar. Elijah nodded, his jaw tightening. Then we hit back harder. Later that evening, Elijah's phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. Councilman Brooks, a deep voice said, I believe I can help you. Elijah's eyes narrowed. Who is this? A former insider. Let's just say I know Leonard Voss's methods better than anyone. Elijah motioned for Sarah to join him and put the call on speaker. If that's true, then why haven't you come forward before? The voice paused, then said, because speaking out against Voss is dangerous. But now the public is watching. He can't silence everyone. Meet me tonight, and I'll give you everything you need to end this. Elijah exchanged a glance with Sarah, who shook her head, her skepticism clear. Where? Elijah asked. Union Station. Lower level, by the old freight platform. Midnight. Come a lune. The line went dead. Sarah threw up her hands. This screams trap, Elijah. Maybe, Elijah said, but if it's real, this could be the final piece we need. By midnight, Elijah stood on the dimly lit platform at Union Station. The air was damp and heavy, the faint hum of passing trains echoing through the cavernous space. His every instinct told him to leave, but he stayed, determined to see it through. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man in his late 50s, wearing a rumpled coat. His face was worn, his eyes darting nervously. You're the councilman, the man said, his voice low. And you're the insider, Elijah replied. What do you have for me? The man pulled a file from his coat and handed it to Elijah. This is everything. Memos, financial records, directives from Voss. It's all their proof of how he weaponized the airline's security system for personal and political gain. Elijah opened the file and scanned the contents. The documents were damning. Detailed logs of payments to airline executives, memos instructing employees to flag problematic passengers, and emails directly linking Wacth to the scheme. "This is exactly what we need," Elijah said, his voice tinged with awe. The man nodded, but his face remained tense. "Be careful. Wacth doesn't play fair. He'll do whatever it takes to protect himself." Back at the office, Sarah and Elijah pored over the new documents, their energy renewed despite the late hour. "This connects all the dots," Sarah said, her excitement palpable. "We've got payments, instructions, and timelines. There's no way they can talk their way out of this." "But it's not enough to release it," Elijah said, his tone measured. "We need to present it in a way that leaves no room for doubt." Sarah grinned. "Then let's make it impossible for them to hide. A live-stream press briefing, with journalists invited to ask questions directly. We'll lay it all out in real time." Elijah hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing on him. "If we do this, there's no turning back. Wacth will come at us, with everything he has left." "Good," Sarah said, her voice fierce. "Let him, because after this, he won't have anything left to fight with." As dawn broke over Chicago, Elijah prepared for the most important statement of his life. With the evidence in hand and the public's attention squarely on him, he knew this was the moment to strike the final blow. The system Wacth had built was crumbling, and Elijah was ready to bring it down. The press briefing was set up in a large conference room downtown, the kind typically used for corporate meetings. Now it was transformed into a battleground for truth. Reporters filled every seat, cameras pointed at the podium where Elijah would soon stand. Behind the scenes, Sarah directed a small team, ensuring every document, memo, and email was ready to be projected onto the screens flanking the stage. Kevin paced nervously, clutching his phone. "This is it," he said to Elijah. "The moment everything changes, for better or worse." Elijah adjusted his tie, meeting Kevin's gaze. "For better. It has to be." Sarah stepped over, her face serious but confident. "All the files are uploaded to a secure cloud server. Once you start, I'll share the link with every journalist here. There's no way Wacth can spin this in time." Elijah nodded. "Let's do this." As Elijah stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. The cameras zoomed in, capturing the determination in his expression. He gripped the edges of the podium, his voice steady as he began. "Good morning. Today, I stand before you not just as a councilman, but as a representative of everyone who has ever been silenced, targeted, or oppressed because they dared to stand for what's right." He glanced at Sarah, who nodded, signaling that the files were being sent to the journalists' devices. "For months," Elijah continued, "a powerful lobbyist named Leonard Wacth and his associates have used their influence to target activists, politicians, and community leaders, primarily black leaders, who pose a threat to their profits. They've weaponized airline security protocols, fabricated smear campaigns, and tried to intimidate those who stand in their way." The screens behind him lit up, displaying the documents. The room erupted in gasps as reporters saw the proof. Emails ordering specific passengers to be flagged, payment logs tied to Wacth, and a directive labeled Operation Silence. "This isn't just about me," Elijah said, his voice rising. "It's about a system that prioritizes profit over people, that believes it can abuse power without consequences. Today we say no more." The questions came fast and furious, but Elijah answered each one with confidence. Sarah stepped in occasionally, providing additional details from the files. "Councilman Brooks," one reporter asked, "do you believe Wacth's actions are part of a broader systemic issue?" "Absolutely," Elijah replied. "What Wacth did is a symptom of a larger disease, a culture that treats marginalized communities as expendable obstacles. We're not just exposing him, we're demanding change." Another reporter raised their hand. What's your next step? We've already submitted this evidence to federal investigators, Elijah said. And I'm filing a formal civil rights lawsuit against Leonard Voss, the airline, and anyone else involved in this scheme. The room buzzed with activity as reporters began filing their stories in real time. Within hours, the fallout began. Major news outlets broadcast the story, dissecting every detail of Voss's operation. Social media exploded with outrage, and exposed the system trended worldwide. Voss's initial response of vague denial crumbled under the weight of the evidence. By evening, his lawyer issued a statement announcing Voss's resignation from his lobbying firm. The airline fared no better. Public outcry forced its CEO to step down, and the company promised sweeping reforms, including an external audit and new anti-discrimination policies. Elijah watched the news unfold from the same diner where he and Sarah had first strategized. The tension that had gripped him for days began to ease, replaced by a quiet determination. Sarah sat across from him, her laptop closed for the first time in hours. "You did it," she said, her voice soft but proud. "We did it," Elijah corrected, a small smile playing on his lips. "But this is just the beginning." Sarah nodded. "Now comes the hard part, making sure the change sticks." Elijah looked out the window at the bustling city streets. For the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope. Weeks later, Elijah stood on the steps of City Hall, addressing a crowd of supporters. "This victory belongs to all of us," he said, his voice carrying over the cheers. "But the fight for justice doesn't end here. Together, we'll keep pushing for accountability, for equality, and for a future where no one is silenced." The crowd roared, their energy a testament to the power of truth. As Elijah stepped back, Sarah joined him, a satisfied smile on her face. "You ready for what's next?" she asked. Elijah glanced at the skyline, his resolve unshakable. "Always." Together, they walked down the steps, ready to face whatever battles lay ahead. Elijah Brooks' story is a testament to the power of resilience, truth, and standing against injustice. From targeted schemes to systemic battles, his unwavering determination reminds us all that one voice, when amplified with courage and evidence, can ignite change. If this story inspired you, share it with your community and join the movement for justice in your own way. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories of resilience, bravery, and the fight for equality. Together, we can shine a light on injustice and build a brighter, more inclusive future. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next powerful story. Let's stand united and make a difference one story at a time.